The earliest manuscripts don't have any vowels at all. So they don't have the fatha, the kasra, the dhamma, these kinds of things. They're all absent. They don't have a shadda. They can't write these things. They only write the letters. But at some point they start writing vowels. They start adding vowels, and they're gorgeous manuscripts. This is in the Kufic manuscript period. And they start using mostly red dots to write the reading traditions. So the reading traditions that are associated with the recitation of the Quran. And something really cool comes out of that. Once you start looking at that, you find that it is absolutely filled with forms that are not transmitted. Let me modulate that a little bit. So very often, specific variants that we find that are in these manuscripts, written in these manuscripts, are variants that are known to the tradition. They are recorded, and they'll say, yeah, this person read it like this person read it like that. But as a whole, if you take these vocalized manuscripts, very commonly you find that they have systems and they have a complete reading which does not agree with the canonical readings as we know them. So let's go back to the canonical readings real quick. Canonical readings, as we know them, so there's 10 different readings, and these are systems. They're complete, right? So once you follow one reading of the Quran, you follow every single word is basically determined for you how you're supposed to read it. So every variant in wording is different. Every difference in grammar is basically done. So these are complete systems, start to finish of the whole Quran. The reading of Hamza is, in a sense, a whole Quran, so to speak. The reading of Warsh is a whole Quran, right? Then if you look at these manuscripts, you find, yes, they sometimes have known elements, but we cannot connect it to any one, certainly not to any one canonical reader, but not even to any one non-canonical reader. We find all these little bits, but the whole system that we find, and they're very often clear systems, they don't show up in a tradition. And we see that quite a lot, actually. And this is both in, say, the grammatical part. There are some real differences in how the grammar of these readings that we find in these vocalized manuscripts work, but also in the wording and how these wordings combine. And every now and then, especially in the grammatical part, which is the part I'm interested in, so that's why I know it better, it might also be in the readings, we find things that just do not get recorded by the tradition at all. The tradition records a lot of things, but some of these just don't show up. So I've been doing a research into the pronominal system of Quranic manuscripts together with my colleague Haitham Sidki, and we've been studying these vocalized Qurans and see, okay, what do we see here? What systems do we see here in the pronouns? And we're looking at the third person pronoun, which is the singular is, like we find in kitabuhu, right, his book, or kutubuhum, their books, so hu and hum, and how these kind of develop. And there's this large group of manuscripts which does something interesting, something that none of the canonical readings do, which is they don't harmonize. What does that mean? Well, so if you would say in classical Arabic or in most Quranic reading traditions, you want to say to them you would say ilayhim, or to him you would say ilayhi, or in it you would say fihi. And then in these manuscripts we find endless examples where that kind of vowel harmony doesn't happen, and instead you get ilayhu and fihu, and sometimes we even find bihu. So we find this very different system. We find alayhumu, and while all these different variants are mentioned, the specific systems that we find in these manuscripts do not get recorded at all. We cannot look at these manuscripts and say, oh, that's this reader. It's not one of the canonical readers, but it's not even one of the non-canonical readers that get recorded. And that's because the non-canonical readers get recorded much less accurately. So there's a lot of stuff to be found there still, and you constantly run into this. And one of, say, my hobbies that I do with these kinds of things, I read the grammarians, the early grammarians, and every now and then the early grammarians say something strange and something that I do not recognize from the canonical reading traditions. Like, well, that's strange. I've never seen this in the canonical reading traditions. And then I open up the manuscripts and look at the manuscripts, and there it is, and there I found it. I had one of these things just the other day. For Sibawayh, he describes that the plural of Rasul is Rusul or Rusul without a U in the second syllable, so Rusul. I was like, well, that's funny. None of the canonical reading traditions ever do that. They always have a Rusul. And then I was like, well, okay, if Sibawayh describes it as a way of saying things, I bet it's there in one of the manuscripts. So I started looking in the manuscripts, and there it was. It just, was there in my face, looking at me, and there it was. And that just shows when you find that in a manuscript, that manuscript is not a canonical reading, because none of the canonical readers do this. And as I said, if you find one deviation, basically, you lose the whole system, because the whole system of a reading is every single word is determined. And then if you start looking further, you start seeing all these other deviations. So what does this mean? It means when it comes to the recitation of the Quran, there was a lot of difference of opinion. Not just so among the canonical readers, there's already quite a lot of difference of opinion, but there were many more opinions than just the canonical readers. The canonical readers get standardized in the 4th century, early 4th century Hijri, while they were active in the mid-2nd century mostly. So quite a long time after that. And they get standardized because they're supposed to be the most popular readings, etc. But really, we have manuscripts from the lifetime of the canonizer Ibn Mujahid that do not follow these standard readings. And a real shift seems to happen after the canonization.